Hey, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. and today I'm reviewing Zoo Tycoon from Triceratops. Zoo Tycoon from, Microsoft fame and like the PC game you've played or the Xbox. I don't even know what it's on anymore. I'm pretty sure there's an Xbox version of this game. It makes sense. Microsoft does own the game. I'm getting way out of my league here. This is Zoo Tycoon. This is Zoo Tycoon, the board game. This is officially based on the whole IP and all that stuff, and this is a Kickstarter title. I'll have a link to the Kickstarter down below. Rules, components, all that stuff. Obviously, everything you see here, all prototypes, all stuff subject to change. Some of these things definitely will be seeing changes. Like I said, prototype, so let's go ahead and dive into this. Now, this will be a surface level how to play over here because there's a lot going on and trying to explain it all. While not that hard to actually explain, it's a lot to explain, so we're going to kind of skip all of that. Zoo Tycoon is a game of building a zoo, as you might imagine, hence the, whole zoo situation. It's a game about building a zoo. You're going to have tons of little meeples you're throwing into your park. The way I have it set up over here is we have our market board over here with all the animals. We have our board which is tracking all our stats. We have the animal market, and we have our own individual player board over here. So more players means more of this section here. This part's all static. As far as the gameplay is going to take place over 7-ish rounds. There's a starter round, which is a bit of a half round that has some of the rules in place and some things are skipped. Then there's 6 full rounds, and then there's the end game scoring to figure out how well you did in your zoo. To that end, you're trying to be mindful of your popularity and your conservation. You're going to have your conservation track over here, your education track, which will help you during the game, and then your popularity, which will help drive your income as well as your score at the end of the game, is the lesser of your popularity track and your conservation track. Basically, you want to try to balance both those things, and popularity will be a little easier as far as the intuitive aspects, as far as how you get your popularity up. Your conservation will take a little bit more planning in terms of the multiple ways and pathways you can try to pursue to get your conservation score up in the game. That's how you win. The gameplay every single round is going to go through a seasonal aspect over here, all tracked nicely on the sideboard. You go through the spring, summer, autumn, and spring, summer, fall, and winter. In spring, you're going to go ahead and rotate the starting player. You're going to draw an event card from this deck over here, putting it into play in the new section, figuring out whatever that impact that has. Every zoo loses $3, so that's something that can happen over there. We also have the offspring phase, where all the animals on your board are going to roll to see if they generate any offspring. This situation where you're going to go ahead and take a look at your specific animal cards. So for example, let's say we have this animal over here, the Asian elephant. The Asian elephant will either they'll either generate offspring on a 6 or a 5, depending on their general stats, which is something we'll get to more as we explain these animal cards. But basically, animals will have more or less success depending on a variety of factors at play. From there, you're going to go ahead and move to summer. In summer, you're going to renew the animal market, which generally means shifting this a bit up, down, left to right. Now, you probably can't see this well from the top cam over here, it's too far, but each animal market underneath this board, there's a market board. There's a stat board that shows you a ton of details as far as the demand and supply for all these animals. And as you move the market board, you effectively change those stats. Again, I'm not going to heavily do this right now. It works. We'll talk more about it, but it does work. You move it around and it will show you the demand and supply for a ton of animals. From there, you're going to go ahead and make trades with the market. Every player has the opportunity to make up to 2 trades, which means getting rid of animals and or getting animals. This is important. This is the kind of thing where you dive into the game and you're like getting rid of animals. This is Zoo Tycoon. I want to get all my animals. But you do need to be mindful of your animal's happiness and the way animals actually work together and how many males can be in each exhibit, whether it's free-for-all, whether there's only one male or whether there's multiple males as long as there's no females. All these different things you're trying to balance in the game. And during the course of the game, you also might breed when you don't want to breed. And to that end, having a way to get rid of your animals is important because otherwise you will lose points, or more specifically, you'll lose popularity if you have too much overpopulation or the wrong thing. So it's something you definitely want to balance as the game goes on. Sure, early game it's all about getting animals, but late game or mid game even, you're going to want to start trying to get rid of some animals because it takes a lot to manage a zoo, and you can't always be getting everything in. From there, we're going to go ahead and clear the market board. We'll clear all the market board from any trades. Every player made 2 trades, leaving or going, based on the demand and supply of the available market. And from there, there's animals you gather. Let's just go ahead and pretend that I went ahead and I gathered the chimpanzees over here. The chimpanzees currently support 2 male and 2 female. So I'll go to the chimpanzee box over here. I'll grab 2 males and 2 females when making a trade, and we'll put it into our little incoming box over here. You can have up to 2 species incoming your zoo at any given time, and 1 species leaving your zoo at any given time. And I'll find my chimpanzee card, because I just went ahead and got those chimpanzees. I'm just skipping that chimp over there. I'm going chimpanzees. Let's go ahead and find that card, put it into play, If I can get it, here we go. Here we go. We got chimpanzees over here. Now, chimpanzees are comfortable having any combination of males or females in the exhibit. As you can see over here, there's all this symbology we haven't really gotten into as far as how the animals score. A basic idea is going to be their population score if you build certain things in their exhibit. How many conservation focal points you can build, which will help you with their conservation score. Think of it as education. Well, that's more education. Think of it as ways to help with the conservation of animals. Your straight up popularity, which will help you throughout the game. There's going to be a few stats over here. We're not going to heavily get into this. It focuses on the management, but this part over here shows that any combination of males or females can be in the zoo. So we're going to try to be mindful of that. We also need to be mindful of the terrain they want. That's going to be the whole market phase. We got our chimpanzees, we're ready to go. Then we go to the fall zone over here, the fall phase. In fall, we'll go ahead and adjust our track up here because we're going to go ahead and get 3 enclosures. At the beginning of the game, you get 6, but as the game progresses, you get 3, although there are ways to score extra enclosures. And then from there, you're going to go ahead and look at the donor. The donor is going to be one of the ways you get extra enclosures. They'll be preset for the round, so you'll see it in advance. You'll know how to get an additional enclosure. You can take loans if necessary, and then you go to the building phase, which is where most of the action happens in the game. The building phase is where you're going to spend your money, introduce your animals, and do all the things before we get to winter, which is kind of cleanup. To that end, there's a lot going on here. This is the part where we're going to skip a whole bunch of things, but we'll go ahead and talk about the fact that let's go ahead and put some enclosures in play. We do want to get that rainforest stuff going on, so we're going to go ahead and grab some tiles over here. Let's see if we can grab some tiles. Let's put 1 down over here and 1 down over here. And we're going to go ahead and get a few tiles down on the board so we can get our chimpanzees in play. Now, chimpanzees require the rainforest background, so we're going to put that in play. They require you can have up to 3 per tile. So we're going to put 3 on one tile and 1 on another tile. Over here, they require having at least 1 empty space. In the general, different animals will want more or less empty space, so you want to be mindful of that. And you're also paying per space that you have the animals on, so you need to be mindful of that as well in terms of your zoo upkeep costs. They don't need any additional of these over here, but at least not at level 1. And over here, we got 4. 4 is the minimum level of chimpanzees to actually build that exhibit. You need a minimum of 4. And then as the game goes on, you're going to go ahead and mark this over here, mark these stats, showing you what level you're up to. But as the game progresses, you'll potentially be adding additional empty spaces, additional little, over here, these focal points over here that will add to your, what they want they want either 2 or 3, and then more chimpanzees as well, which will allow you to build popularity focal points as well. Basically, you're trying to manage your cards. You're trying to manage your stats on this card, managing the actual slow training of this. This is something you can train this upwards, but the animal experience will also grow every round. But you're managing the empty space, the focal points, as well as the population of the species. You're doing all of that every time you build an animal, trying to take into account how they can best fit into your zoo. There's a lot of stuff we're not talking about here. We're not talking about different things like when you take animals from the market, there are limitations on what you can take based on any number of other requirements. There are limitations based on, some of the third level animals want you to have certain experience with certain types of animals. Some of the animals will not enter the zoo. You can't take a level 2 or 3 if there are any unhappy animals in your zoo on the lowest tier. So there's lots of things you're trying to manage here where you're only going surface level as far as the rules, but doing this zone, you're going to go ahead, you're going to use your enclosure points effectively to put enclosures in play. You're going to use your money to buy a whole bunch of things from anything from, we have a bunch of these stores over here, just different markets and stores you can put on the board. They'll give you different things from lowering your upkeep in the game, so you'll have different opportunities which will lower your upkeep costs. You'll have additional education points. You'll have additional education and conservation points. You'll have additional popularity. There's going to be all these things you're trying to juggle based on how they go into your zoo. Popularity parks will want to go next to other buildings and will give you points. You'll have conservation points being added from these buildings. You're going to have the lower maintenance costs from some of these buildings. There's a whole bunch of buildings you can place down in addition to the actual exhibits itself, all of which will cost you money but will go towards your actual management of the zoo as you try to figure out how to efficiently build a zoo that will store all the animals, that will generate more income and popularity, because your popularity is constantly rising. You're trying to manage your popularity and your buzz. Popularity is just straight up popularity. I build the chimpanzees, that's for popularity. We're going to go ahead and mark this on the track. But additionally, there's something called buzz. Buzz happens every round based on the animals you add to your zoo, as well as animals that give birth in your zoo, which give you an additional degree of tracking as far as extra income that goes away. So you have ongoing popularity and temporary popularity that you're trying to manage as you build all these things out. Additionally, we haven't talked about your workers. You get 1 free worker every round that you can utilize for a variety of different options over here. Anything from helping with your breeding to lowering your breeding, anything from additional zoo transport, so you can do an additional trade every round, alternatively doubling the demand of a spot, that, or alternatively going ahead and trading your animals. There's going to be different options you can do, and you can spend additional workers, which will add to your upkeep costs, but will give you more things you can do, including generating conservation, training, education, as well as popularity. So a whole bunch of things you're trying to manage throughout this phase before you eventually make your way to winter. We'll go through a few basic steps. In winter, you're going to go ahead and bump up the stat of any animal you have. Basically, animal as you're keeping over here is going to level their training, or whatever you want to call it. We have our education scoring, where whoever's highest on the education track will get a conservation point. And then you'll go ahead and get taxes and revenue. Taxes, you can never keep more than 3 money round to round. Revenues are going to be based on your popularity with initial bonus for first and second. And finally, you'll reset your buzz and your workers and proceed with a new year. If that sounds like a lot, it's because it is. There's a lot going on in this game, and I think we'll go ahead and start moving to the review part of things. There's a lot going on in this game, and it is overwhelming, but it's not hard to learn. It's overwhelming without being hard to learn. There's just a lot of information, more than I generally would give for a review, but over here, you're trying to manage the species of your zoo. That's what it comes down to. The core concept is all these cards and the complications these cards give in, as well as these shops you're placing down. There's a ton to manage and a ton to plan on. We haven't even talked about the concept of additional animals. There's going to be a whole market board of additional animals over here, which are basically tiles that go into your conservations. They go into your what's it called? Not your conservations, your enclosures. Your tiles that go into your enclosures, which will be treated as additional animals in that enclosure. If you've ever been to a zoo and you see different animals in the same enclosure, that's the concept that you have here. You have that prime focal animal, but additional animals can be added as well, giving you additional maintenance costs, additional popularity, additional education points, additional everything going on in this game. There's just a lot to manage, and it all comes down to trying to figure out that balance. Your income, your expenses, your various people, how everything lines up in the zoo, trying to get a perfect placement, trying to plan towards the future while planning for the present as well. There's a lot happening in Zoo Tycoon. Which brings us directly to ease of play. Ease of play is the rules are a lot here. The table space is a lot, the rules is a lot, the game is 2 to 3 hours long. There's a lot going on. It's a 2 to 4 player game. It's 2 to 3 hours long easily, and especially that first game for sure. There's a lot happening here as far as the game goes. This is not a simple game, to the point that I'm a little worried that this is targeting an audience of people who might not be comfortable with that huge amount of overhead going on. Overhead in a good way. This is a heavy game. This is a deep game. We'll talk more about this in the review, but this is certainly not a light, simple, accessible game. The rules are not too complicated. There's just a lot of them, and there's a lot to manage in this game. Again, in a good way for me. I'm just mindful of the target audience for Zoo Tycoon. That's the part I'm balancing there. So easy to play, lots of board space, lots of rules, not that short a game either. As far as what I like, don't like, and can see others not liking, there's a lot of things I like here, but heavily, the biggest thing I can say about this game is it feels like you're managing a zoo. It feels like you're managing a zoo. That is the biggest thing that Zoo Tycoon does right. It feels like maintenance. Reading the rules, there are elements of the game that I thought would be tedious or unnecessary or annoying. That aspect I touched upon earlier, the fact that I have to give up a trade to get rid of animals, well, it actually goes into your entire strategy as you figure out what to do, where to do it. There are times where you intentionally grab an all-male population because you actually want to make sure you don't breed. You want to make sure that you can keep things in control. It feels like you're trying to manage a number of different things, from making sure your species don't overpopulate, to make sure that they do have more babies so you can actually grow and generate more and more, so they can be generating, well, they don't generate more revenue, but they generate more happiness, which goes to your animal welfare, which can go to contribute to your ability to get other animals, which contribute to your score of getting extra enclosures every round. There's a lot happening in this game, a lot of things to actually manage going on. It feels like you're managing a zoo. And there's a ton of depth to the experience. There are so many animals as you go through the game. As the first time you play a game, you're going to get towards the end game and then realize you can't buy half of what you want to buy. You can't get to half those animals because you didn't plan or towards them. You have to plan towards that end game. You have to plan towards these various conservation points. You're going to go ahead where you cooperate with other zoos by having certain species within your zoo, getting those conservation points. Your level 3 animals over here, you're going to need to have certain numbers of animals. That elephant or the panda, these are all going to require different degrees of things that you are planning and actively working towards. You will become better at managing certain species than others. They will walk into your zoo better trained because of that. There's a lot happening here as far as the ways you can try to pursue points in this game. Your first game is going to be so drastically different than your second, because your second game, you will actually walk into the game understanding that you have to walk in with a plan, that there's so many ways and opportunities to focus on your zoo, from ensuring you have a small number of incredibly happy select few animals to just having a ton of different different things so you can just generate all that buzz and popularity and make sure your income and popularity and constantly your revenues are up as you try to make sure there's more and more money flowing to the zoo while you keep your animals happy and keep them alive. There's a ton of variability to the ways you can try to explore this engine. Zoo Tycoon gives you a lot of stuff to do, and the game length, while long, does feel about right. I say about right because I debate whether a round shorter will be good or not. Overall, I think that 6 rounds lets you do a lot, and 5 rounds lets you do a lot, but might be enough. But either way, overall, the game really does an incredibly good job at giving you strategy, giving you depth, giving you complexity, and making you feel like you're running a zoo. It gets that part right. As far as what I don't like, there's a bunch of things I'm going to touch upon, and it might sound like there's a whole lot here. There are a bunch of things I don't like, but most of them are more nitpicky. We'll talk about them. Well, let's go through them. Just don't let them take away from the things that I like about this game. This game is excellent. As far as what I don't like, first of all, like I said already, there's a lot to manage here. There's a lot to manage, there's a lot of paperwork, there's a lot to set up and tear down, and it's very easy to incorrectly track something and not realize when and where. Even things like just zoo popularity, because of the fact that some of the things you get for popularity are temporary, you can't just reference your board, it's not always easy to backtrack, and especially if you knock a token, if you accidentally drop something on this board, it's going to be a mess trying to figure out where things were. This game has a lot of setup, a lot of tear down, and a lot to manage, so you have to walk in understanding that. Secondly, despite the fact that I said there's a lot of variety to the experience, there's a lot of variety to the ways you can explore this engine. There's actually very little variety to the actual experience itself. Meaning there's a ton of pathways you can try, but once you kind of figure out an optimal pathway, the game doesn't give you enough variety to try to incentivize other things. A good example here, if you've played it, is a game like Feast for Odin, for example, is a great example of a game that gives you a ton of variety of things you can try to do, but then additionally they give you all these occupation cards which force you to slightly reconsider the pros and cons of different options because the game's throwing extra variety your way that changes the scale of what's optimal. One of my concerns about Zoo Tycoon is that it could be the kind of game that 15-20 plays in, there's not enough changing up your progression forward. The market board does rotate, it does, but I kind of wish there was an additional level, and sure, there's events, they don't have that much of an impact, the donors don't have that much of an impact. The market board is the biggest thing that's going to stop you from having a perfect plan to work towards and forces you to be variable in what you do. But overall, I would have loved to see something like the occupation cards in Feast for Odin to further mix up how this experience works. There's a ton of variety to trying to explore this, but then not a lot of variety once you have explored it, if that makes sense. The bigger issue, I'd say, for me, is the rich get richer in this game. One thing I've noticed after a few plays by now is the fact that this is a game that rewards the rich for doing well. If you have a zoo that is doing well, the game rewards you for doing well, which already is kind of backwards. The fact that, I mean, strategically or in life it makes sense, but in terms of trying to keep the players invested, the game says, hey, your zoo's doing really well, so we're going to give you extra perks for it, which means the rich do very much get richer in this game. If things are going well for you, they will go more well for you. If you find yourself falling behind early on, it may well be hard to catch up. There's no concept of grants or anything like that. I think the game does need some sort of like a grant option to try to make it so that players who are falling behind still have a degree of investment while also making sure that they don't just get rewarded for falling behind. And then lastly, and this one's jokingly but also serious, there's no giraffes. This is a zoo game with no giraffes. I want giraffes in this game. But from there, going into what I can see others not liking, first of all, like I said already, the game can feel a bit long, arguably a round too long. I think you can easily cut a round and still have a great, excellent experience. You just have to make sure you're all on the same page. I think 2 rounds being cut would arguably be called a short game at that point. Still gives you a lot to do, but that would start being calling a short game. So you can definitely move it a little bit lower. If that 2 to 3 hour playtime is a bit too much, you can cut it down to an hour and a half, 2 hours by cutting around, or aggressively if you want to. Past that, the overpopulation aspects. Like I touched upon already, the overpopulation to me fed into the whole feeling of managing a zoo, but that doesn't mean you'll like it. You may find managing overpopulation to be a drag and something that doesn't feel rewarding. I know in some games I find that kind of maintenance not fun. Here, I'm totally fine with it, but yeah, it's definitely a thing. And then lastly, the zoo board over here. This is something to be mindful, but the way this shifts around, basically the way what you have effectively underneath this is you have this giant sheet underneath here, which has had tons of stats, and they all have different stats, so as you move around the board, this is a very small thing to be mindful of, but if a player figures out the game or memorizes any of this, they can actually try to predict around what's going to happen, so just make sure you have someone who doesn't know the game moving the board around over there. As far as final thoughts on Zoo Tycoon, I really like this. I like it a whole lot more than I thought I would walking in. This is to me a game. I mean, I played Roller Coaster Tycoon a ton growing up, and Zoo Tycoon not as much, but definitely a lot, and I really enjoyed the experience, and I was like, they're not going to be able to capture that feeling. Especially as I read the rules and saw the board, I was like, I don't see how they're going to capture that feeling of managing a zoo, but they do an excellent job at capturing the feeling of managing a zoo. They do so with some pros and cons to be mindful of. the maintenance, the tracking, the sheer amount of stuff, the setup, the tear down, that rich get richer. There are different things at play here. And again, prototype review, factor all that in. I really, really, really hope they have a good solution for like storing these animals that are different than what I'm seeing here, because otherwise I'm gonna have to go aftermarket and buy something. These animals right now, every game have to go into and out of a bag. There should be a general central like insert or something. I don't know what the plans are for this. There's a lot of good things happening here and a few concerns. Overall for me, Zoo Tycoon right now is a 4 out of 5. I'm curious to see what the final game does for me. Again, this is a prototype. I'm curious to see what the final game does. I'm curious to see what aspects are changed or adjusted or quality of life improvements are added. Right now, this is an excellent game that gives me a strong feeling of managing a zoo. I'd love to see some variability from some sort of occupation cards, and I'd love to see some aspects to make this easier to set up and table, but past that, I really enjoy this experience. If you're looking for other game recommendations, and again, link to the Kickstarter down below. If you're looking for other game recommendations, first of all, if you want something on the lighter side that gives you all those fun little animal meeples, Wild Serengeti from Bad Comic Games will give you a totally different game, a whole lot easier to dive into and a whole lot more accessible, but very, very different. But if you're looking for managing a zoo in a whole different sense, with a very different way of approaching the engine, Arc Nova from Capstone Games is a very well-rated game that's climbing rapidly through the Board Game Geek rankings, doing tremendously well, and it gives you a whole different way of managing and building out your zoo. In any case, until next time, I'm Alex Radcliffe from Board Game Co. Hope you enjoyed this video, and as always, I hope you have a good one.